Welcome to a special program. Today, we are gonna feature one of our guest speakers for the IFC's 4th Annual IFC Talks, the JAMP Transformational Treatment and the Archetypes. You can't see me. So in this conference that we're holding in Salt Lake City, on the 13th, 14th, and 15th of October. We have a very special guest today. This is Karin. You changed your name, and then I changed it, and then I lost it.
Karin Dremel.
Dremel, okay. So Karin Dremel is here with us. She is one of our featured speakers. She is gonna tell us about herself and also talk about her work. So we're very excited to have her. We're gonna ask her a couple of questions about herself and her thoughts about the work. So without further ado, Karin, please introduce yourself to our listeners, our viewers.
Thank you so much. Thank you, first and foremost, for having me. And for sort of giving me, before we did this, a wonderful overview of the beautiful work you're doing and the passion that goes into it. And so I am, my name is Karin Dremel, or Karin Dremel. I am German. And my Ursprung, my origin is in Heidelberg, Germany, which still is home and probably always will be. And I dwell in Boulder, Colorado for the last 2 decades. I came to Boulder, Colorado to pursue, earlier than that, almost a long time, 25 years ago, to pursue learning about trauma, studying trauma, and what I call apprenticing with trauma. There's a longer story about apprenticing because my very first profession is an apprenticeship in cabinet making, a German traditional apprenticeship in cabinet making. I'm a journeywoman and became a journeywoman in trauma, and consider myself still as apprenticing with trauma. I don't think humans will be able to master trauma, but that could be a conversation with Dr. Lahab at some point over a glass of wine. And I might be convinced. So I want to thank Christy, who is the link, the sort of the link of this constellation of us here today. And I could say more about me, but you can also find some of the information. There will be a website link on the place where this video is going to be, and then you can sort of go in there and find whatever is there, a website in perpetual emergence, not emergency, but emergence. And you can find more about those details of an introduction in writing if you are interested in that. So thank you, Christy, my dear, dear colleague. And for inviting me to Utah, for inviting me to this conference, and for inviting me into this field and into this already tangible presence of a passion for the same end of getting to know trauma, getting to meet trauma, and getting to invite trauma into integration.
Yeah, Karin, when I first met you, part of the reason why I wanted you to come speak at the conference was I had different therapists that I'd worked with, and you were so different and so interesting in the past that you were able to take me through personally, and to see it in such a different way and less clinical, which I really appreciated, because parts of that just didn't work for me. And I would really like you to talk about, just give us a little taste of of what you do? Because I think it's very different from your average therapy that someone would see you about for trauma. Could you give us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it will tie back into where I started, literally where I started to my Ursprung. And I'm saying this because we're sort of in a Germanic field overall with, Swiss, Germanic field with the Jungian sort of core passion that has infected, may I say that, Dr. Lahab?
Absolutely, yeah.
And others and myself. And so I'd like to tell a little story of transition. And the little story of transition goes back to about it goes back to 1994, 1995, when I had already been for more than 10 years, over a decade, maybe a dozen years. Prior to that, I sat in my first 1984, I sat in my first actual therapy session with somebody I still highly, cherish. Even as some of the things that this man was doing did not really work for me, but it was that opening of a really big portal and then stumbling over, all sorts of things, but in the stumbling also falling into places that really began grounding and consolidating what I was struggling with. And then 10 years forward, and that sort of might resonate with what you will hear from Dr. Lahab's, a too big bite was sort of offered to me, and I took that too big bite, and it got me into a very, very difficult place of maybe not shattering it, but certainly of disintegration. And it was extremely hard, especially for my environment, because at that time in 1994, 95, trauma in Germany as a thing, now it's really, now it's everywhere, as this thing was just emerging. And that people were not diagnosable with this, that, or the other sort of pathology, but many pathologies were sort of beginning to be understood as rooting in traumatic moments, traumatic durations, traumatic impact. I was a mess. And so I was trying to figure it out. People around me got very, very impatient with me and cruel, which impatient people can be. And so I was exploring the possibility to go to an what do you call it, inside treatment? No, stationär, into a hospital or into whatever. So because I was already in the field I'm a German naturopath, which is actually where that really is originally in Germany. The way I studied it is integrative healing practices, because you're exposed to everything on the grounding of sort of a general medical education. And so I looked for the cutting edge, right? The cutting edge place that might have an understanding of where I was and how that might help and so forth. And I wrote to these people, and I wrote my story, and I wrote my early on story that continues to be my story, but that at that time was really in high activation and very, very low executive functioning, if you will, in my daily life. And I got a letter back. And it said, oh, we would welcome you, and you would, fit right in and so forth. And then it explained, because whatever my history, right? And I don't even remember if that letter said trauma, but whatever my sort of the history of my situation was, I would be housed, I would be in this, there are two homes, obviously, but I would be in this one house of the people they called früh gestört. Now, this is a German word, and if I translate it, it would be early disturbed, early disrupted. There are other translations. But when you say in Germany to somebody, du bist doch gestört, or you are gestört, actually it is an insult. It means you are cuckoo, you're crazy. So our language offers us the possibility to say to somebody very derogatorily, du bist gestört. That's my vernacular, by the way. If you didn't understand that as German, it's not. It's it's the vernacular that I learned in my home village, and I still speak with my people. And so it's not Hochdeutsch, right? It's also not Low Deutsch, but it's my vernacular. So what I'm saying with this, Christy, is this is one of the stories where I can say no. Right? No, not pathology. I guess all these numbers in the DSM now, meanwhile, 4, 5, are useful to make categories that are then payable and that people can hold on to and all of those kind of things. But most disturbances most disruptions in a person's are actually means of keeping them afloat, of keeping them from becoming crazy. And so that's my, that's the most solid platform. I am standing. It's relatively small because there's such a big field, but my platform on which I'm standing is solid. When I say, okay, so tell me about you. Tell me what worked so you and I can sit together here and have, and look at something that's troubling you. Because you made it. You made it here. Yeah. Something must have worked. What worked? Which is the reversal of, okay, you have this diagnosis, you're früh gestört, and so we're putting you into this house, and I don't know if you would have had a lock on the door. Well, the thing is, about a month later, I traveled to the US and I found my first trauma therapist, and who I'm still indebted to. And later learned I became a student and then an assistant and so forth. Now I consider myself a colleague. And so all of this, right? So I did not go because something in me was protective, knowing this would not be a good journey. So I took something that somebody else said, so you have to go to the US, you have to go to Colorado. There will be somebody who can help you. Now, I said at the time, 2 months prior to that, I said, you must be kidding me. I can barely function. And you want me to go where? So this is the story of why you and I, when we first met in that very first, we didn't have a session. Our limbic systems were like two little kitties that sort of circle each other and check out what the other one is. Is that a safe person to be with? Or is that an interesting person to be with? Or how are we going to do this? So that's what we did when we met. And it was certainly not the place of looking for something that was wrong, but for looking for something that would be right between us and that would be right in everything you brought to this.
Yeah, and one thing that I do love about your work, Karin, is your gentleness that you bring to trauma, to helping people understand better how they function within that experience of where they're at, and giving them new ways of feeling less alone in that, and feeling supported, and wasn't complicated. And what I notice about your work is you're able to meet people really where they're at, and manage the cadence of what that needs to be.
Yeah. And that again roots in all of those times of years and years of work with people in many modalities. I studied acupuncture for 2 years. I have not a degree. That's not, in Germany, it's different. But within my licensure, my naturopathic licensure, I have a training in acupuncture. So I started systemic thinking very early on in this process, right? I bring in systemic constellation work, to some people only known as family constellation work. That is just one nugget within the big array of systemic constellation work, which I started being exposed to in 1990. And so being able to know, or being on the road and being consistently on a path of thinking systemically, feeling systemically, right? Getting things systemically really allows me to invite people into their lives, if you will, or invite myself actually into their lives for a process that I call trauma mapping. And what I do there is, so tell me what happened. Tell me what happened, right? Sometimes I say, tell me what happened when you were born, who was there, what happened next, what were the conditions, and that's similar to, well, how was your last week, and then how was your last month, and how was your last year, and how was your last decade, and mapping on a timeline. And I'm seeing it more spatially also, because things are higher and lower, like they maps are not the territory, but they indicate what the territory was and what might be under the territory as well, to me at least now, with all these years of experience. So I'm inviting people to let me bring this mapping capacity that I have of historical trauma, social trauma, cultural trauma, biographical trauma, and the combination thereof, generational trauma, very important in there, right? Because there's anyway, so all of these together create that which then becomes, within one session often, a pretty robust trauma map where people begin to see, I'm not alone. There were those before me, of whom, and we now call this epigenetics, of whom I have taken on or have received some of their wounds, right? I am part of a nation. Remember, I'm German. I'm born 11 years after the gates of Auschwitz opened. Both of my parents are children of war and of Nazi Germany identity until they were 14 and 16 respectively. That didn't make them Nazis thereafter, but it made sure that those 14 to 16 years prior are living safely, were living. My father died in 1982, but my mother is still alive and is going to be 91 shortly. In her experience, they're living very safely in a very intricate pattern of dissociations. Okay, in the next generation, in the third generation, and I consider myself in a way, I'm a war, what they, in Germany, there's whole areas of exploration and research. And so there's the children of war research and the grandchildren of war research, and it all comes together in post World War II and I, don't forget that, sort of mapping how individuals in these big maps, how where their position and what their influences were. And not every German has the same influence. My generational trauma did not include displacement from an area that was east of where Germany ended up in after the war, where people had to flee and lost everything in the process. My generational going back is 7 to 8 generations of Germans in the same location. That's why I'm not a Caucasian, I'm an Odenwaldian. That's the mountain where I come from, right? So all of these things put together allow me to invite myself and being invited. And of course, there is a way to do that without being intrusive or being overwhelming. And, you know, we may even, I don't know if we have time to show at the conference, or if it's more just speaking, we'll figure that out. But there are ways of doing that stay promising to an ongoing process and not overwhelming.
Well, it sounds like you will be bringing a very rich background and helping us see a different view, especially because you are from Germany, and helping us understand trauma in a different way, which is why we're doing the conference. There's many ways to enter that field, and each one of us will, each one of the speakers, me included, will be offering a different lens. And I'm just so happy that you're coming, Karin, to offer yours.
Yeah,
I look forward to it.
I just have this metaphor, you know, we talked about dancing with trauma, right? Did you say that? Dancing with trauma. And I was, you know, you dance. And so some people do a quick step, and that's what I sort of heard in your, you know, there's a way of doing quick step with trauma. And mine is probably a slow waltz.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Karin. And a very enjoyable wouldn't be the right word, but it's not, it's such a gentle and compassionate waltz or dance that you offer.
And I want to emphasize, and you will remember, Christy, that part of the way I'm working is also humor. And it's not always, you know, it's sometimes relatively dark, but bringing things into a place where we can feel sort of the humor in it, and we can actually together sort of land in the now of the humor in it, right?
Which is important as well.
Presence in the humor. And no, trauma is never fun, but we can presence in the humor of certain things that have been bunched up.
Yeah, it's a good way to say that, Karin.
We talk about trauma. I mean, between me and my brothers, we talk about trauma and how we're traumatized, and we laugh.
Yes.
So
we laugh as well in art.
Do you remember what happened? You know, it was very traumatic, but now we talk about it and just we start laughing. Like, so other people who are sitting there and hear the story, they're like, "Oh my God, that happened to you!" Like, oh, many more stories, but this one is the best story that we like, so we tell it.
Yeah.
So yesterday we had this, my brother introduced us to somebody that was our first meeting, but we were talking about trauma. We were just talking about how we used to have lunch, which sometimes could be very traumatic because my father would get very angry with us and we would like to laugh, and then he doesn't want us to laugh, and then that causes all kinds of problems because we can't control it at that point. So, but we were telling this story yesterday and we were laughing. I think the person who was listening to the story was kind of caught aback and like was a little kind of not sure, should they laugh or they should say, "Oh my God," or, you know, I think so. Yeah, I think that humor has a lot of redeeming effects on being able to pass a story that is not really passable in other ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's always also the reality that you made it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There is even
absolutely.
there is even a layer of the joy that can be, and that's by the way very delicate work, because if you ask somebody, so you have to eat, all of those starving little children, it's like, get out of my space, right? I mean, that's not an entry, that's not a portal, but
right.
But you know, helping somebody to remember, you know, when there was very little and there was something, can you remember what that tasted like? And And can you remember what that smelled like? And can you maybe bring that back, and then you are also in the cultural thing, right? Depending on where we're both not US American. I know US American is not from another culture ultimately. So, those things coming in can become resources, even within the densest experience of trauma of, refugee or war or so forth. Yeah.
I think it's going to be fascinating for our attendees to witness you doing the mapping. I think that's fascinating. I think that a lot of people are going to tune into this. I don't know if you wanted to say a little bit more about.
Yes, I can absolutely do this, and I will have those. I have slides for it and so forth, and I will definitely do this in the talk. Because I see, so the headline, if you will, of what I do is systemic traumatology, right? So which brings us out of that word trauma, where everybody, you go to lunch somewhere, right? And the people next door, this really traumatized me, or, you're traumatizing me, or that's a big trauma. And, and it has become such a buzzword, for so many things that are much more intricate. I'm not saying they're not trauma, but they're so much more intricate. And of course, you cannot explain this to somebody at the next table while they're having lunch. Excuse me, no. Right? But that's why I'm calling it systemic traumatology, because it is talking about trauma, not about the one trauma or the trauma that you in your very specific way, or you in your specific way, or I have brought to this conversation, but about trauma as an ology, as something we can talk about.
Correct.
Right? Like psychology, or whatever the other, theology, whatever the other things are. And so we talk about, and then it becomes very quickly, it fans out into more fascinating facets, which we then truly can be allowed and supported into owning, right? And then working from, and other things and so forth. So I call it systemic traumatology, and under that headline, I do a number of things. In my individual work, I have started to call it sort of inner community constellations, inspired by the constellation work and by parts work. More about that maybe at another time. But in the mapping, I'm seeing that all of our human experience, all of our individual human experience, and I want to apologize to the complexes, just in case I'm.
With respect to all the complexes and archetypes,
I want to apologize if
we're very humble. Yes, thank you.
I transgress.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you.
In some way, right? Because
we appreciate that. We don't like to piss off the gods.
I'm a 2-hour newbie, 2-hour and 15-minute newbie to, the possibility to piss off the gods. So I want to apologize that I might do this. But what I see is that our individual lives start as our individual lives. And I said before that I start at conception, and at the becoming of what I call a body self, a self that is sort of nested closely together with the body, and expresses itself through the body. That's neurobiology, relational neurobiology, that's knitted into my understanding of that. And then I'm going, okay, so it starts there, right? But where it really starts, our origin comes from beyond that. So that's my first nested experience where trauma can happen. So we're incarnated, we're at conception, and then there's this 9 months or whatever, and I'm still old-fashioned, and I'm still saying that humans generally are being gestated in a womb. We're at the transition of certain of these things, but those 9 first months are our incarnation, our way of incarnating. Whatever it is that incarnates, it is now part of this. And I add my feet because it's not about being in the head or the brain or something. It's literally about this wholeness of information. So then what really happens there is, this is our Ursprung in my translation, our origin in terms of the incarnated origin. It's the air of the place we're born into. It's the minerals that our mother will be born into, that she breathes. It's the minerals that our mother gets through the vegetables and through whatever she's exposed to, her body is exposed to. So there's this transition from becoming incarnated, but also being made literally by the place in the womb, literally by the place our mother lives in, sustains herself in, the air she breathes. And then it goes all the way to the people surround and the support she has or doesn't have, et cetera, the toxins that come into the all of this. So that's the second. And then it goes on to the third after birth. It's our family of origin, where we just said 3 sisters, fight all the time. They seem to have completely different trauma stories, which to a degree is true, because the firstborn has a different story than the secondborn, has a different story than the thirdborn, right? Sibling order matters. It's a totally different universe if you are the first child to 2 people and whatever support they have or don't have, or if you are the 12th child to 2 people. So also what impacts you, there is some strands that go through because your ancestors are the same. Your parents are sort of that very, the eye of the needle, if you will, right? Through which stuff comes. Anyway, so this is, and then the question is, tell me your story, right? And when somebody then says, I was, my mother was displaced, this is a real story. My mother was pregnant, was displaced from Eastern Europe, came to Germany into a transition camp, got pregnant with me, and got pregnant, and I was born in Canada, right? Somewhere in northern Canada. You have a huge, big story that with one sentence, right? With 3 little transitions. So during the pregnancy, there was displacement for some very, very dangerous situation of not conforming or of war right out. In the conception was in a country that nobody belonged to and in a place that nobody belonged to. And the 6 months of previous pregnancy, both, the pregnant woman and her child sort of have some kind of existential, incarnational experience of that place in Germany, a transition camp. So they have transition experience together. And then here is this stranger coming to northern Canada who never becomes a real Canadian because mother's situation is twofold disrupted. Does it make sense? Am I still making sense?
Yeah.
And a little Canadian is born because now that little Canadian is from the very first moment, a little Canadian.
Correct.
Right? So it will be very different from somebody who comes, let's say, from the Middle East, is 2 years old. And I worked with people in that scenario, or I worked with people who worked in that scenario of now refugees who come from the Middle East and bring their children of, 6 months, 2 years, 5 years. They will, in a similar way, never be the kind of Canadian that somebody who is, because of the politics and because of the traditions and because of a lot of things, that somebody who is born on that soil will be and is exposed from their very first breath, from their birth experience even. We don't want to leave out the birth experience. From their birth experience to who they are going to be in terms of their vulnerabilities and their strengths and resource potential. And so it goes on, right? We're only at birth and within the family, and then there's the extended family. Then there is, you know, all the way who all middles around there. Then there's going to school is the next ring, and then
This is a great intro. I don't want you to kind of do the,
Anyway.
the presentation, but this is a great intro to what you are going to present and kind of talk about, and there's
And this is
different
specifically
aspects.
mapping, right?
Yeah.
The opening, the layout, the lay of the land, and it's a map. It's not the territory. We will step into the territory with all the other ways of working with that.
Perfect.
Some of which
Wonderful.
Perfect. We love it. So please join us in Salt Lake City or on Zoom. We will have a link.
I will be there in person.
And
Wonderful.
Karen's going to be there in person. We're going to be in person. We would love to see all of you in person if you can make it to Salt Lake City, Utah. So with that, I'm going to cut off our speaker because we want you to want more, and she is going to present a lot more. She's going to have a lot of time to kind of explore mapping for all of you to kind of get a really good understanding of the nuance of it, but at the same time, how it's very productive, and your ability to understand it helps your practice and helps you as a healer. So with that, this is our one of our speakers. We will have several different videos for you, and thank you so much, Karin, and we will see you in Salt Lake City. Thank you, Christy, and we'll see the both of you soon. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.